To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Shattered. Wayne Stewart had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, and seemingly impenetrable. At 42, he owned 3 successful construction companies across Texas, a sprawling ranch outside Austin, and what he believed was a perfect family. His wife Claire, 38, was a former beauty queen who now ran a high-end interior design business. Their son Rex, 15, was the star quarterback at their prestigious private school. Wayne had met Claire 15 years ago at a charity gala in Dallas. She was radiant, charming, and came from old money. The Archers were Texas oil royalty. Their marriage had been the social event of the season, and Wayne thought he'd won the ultimate prize. Claire brought class and connections to his blue-collar empire, while he provided the security and passion she claimed to crave. But Wayne Stewart was no ordinary man. Behind his charming smile and Texas gentleman facade lay something darker. He'd grown up poor in East Austin, fighting for every scrap. His father, a mean drunk, had taught him that weakness meant death and betrayal meant war. Wayne had clawed his way up from nothing, leaving broken competitors and enemies in his wake. He never forgot a slight, never forgave a betrayal, and always got even. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Wayne was in his home office, reviewing blueprints for a new downtown development, when his phone rang. Rex's school was calling. "Mr. Stewart? This is Principal Patterson at St. Michael's Academy. Your son collapsed during football practice. He's being rushed to Austin Medical Center." Wayne's blood turned to ice. He grabbed his keys and was racing toward the hospital within minutes, his mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. Rex was his legacy, his pride, the one pure thing in his life that remained untainted by the brutality of business. At the hospital, Wayne found Claire already in the waiting room, her designer clothes wrinkled, mascara smudged. She looked genuinely terrified, the first real emotion he'd seen from her in months. "They won't tell me anything," she said, gripping his arm. "Wayne, what if? He'll be fine." Wayne cut her off, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Rex is strong. He's a Stewart." Dr. Herman Hart, the attending physician, emerged from the ER 30 minutes later. Wayne had known Hart for years. They'd served on the hospital's charity board together. The doctor's expression was grave, professional, but something else flickered in his eyes when he looked at Claire. "Mr. and Mrs. Stewart, Rex is stable now, but we need to run some tests. He suffered what appears to be a severe allergic reaction." "Allergic to what?" Wayne demanded. "He's never had allergies." Dr. Hart hesitated, glancing again at Claire, who had gone pale. "We found elevated levels of certain substances in his preliminary blood work. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but we need to understand what he was exposed to." "What kind of substances?" Wayne's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I'd prefer to discuss this privately with you, Mr. Stewart. Perhaps we could step into my office." Claire started to follow, but Dr. Hart held up a hand. "Just Mr. Stewart for now, please." Chapter 2. The Doctor's Revelation. Dr. Hart's office felt like a confessional booth as Wayne settled into the leather chair across from the doctor's desk. Hart closed the door carefully, his movements deliberate and heavy with unspoken knowledge. "Wayne, we've known each other for 5 years," Hart began, removing his glasses and cleaning them slowly. "What I'm about to tell you, it's going to change everything. Just say it, Herman. The substances we found in Rex's blood aren't from any environmental exposure or contamination. They're pharmaceutical, specifically a combination of anxiety medication and sleeping aids. High-end stuff, prescription only." Wayne's jaw tightened. "You're saying someone drugged my son?" "Not exactly." Hart pulled up Rex's medical file on his computer screen. "The levels suggest chronic exposure over several months, not a single incident. These medications were in his system regularly, but in small doses. Like he was getting them secondhand." "Secondhand how?" Hart's face was grim. "Through physical contact with someone who was taking these medications regularly. Skin-to-skin contact, shared drinks, even being in close proximity to someone who was heavily medicated." Wayne felt something cold and terrible begin to unfurl in his chest. "Are you saying, Claire?" "I ran a discreet background check on the medications," Hart interrupted. "Xanax and Lunesta, both prescribed locally. The Xanax prescription was filled monthly for the past 8 months by. He paused, his voice dropping. By Daniel Chapman. The name hit Wayne like a physical blow. Daniel Chapman, Claire's business partner, a smooth-talking architect who'd been working closely with her on several high-profile projects. Wayne had met him multiple times at social events, had even invited him to their home for dinner parties. There's more, Hart continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I asked Rex some questions while he was semi-conscious. He mentioned that his mother had been affectionate lately. More hugs, more physical contact. He said she'd been giving him drinks, smoothies, sodas, almost daily for months. Wayne's hands slowly clenched into fists. You're telling me that my wife has been so intimate with this Chapman that my son is getting secondhand anxiety medication? The only way this level of cross-contamination makes sense is if she's in very close, very regular contact with someone taking these medications. And if she's then immediately interacting with Rex without washing her hands, changing clothes. Sir, can I meet your wife? Hart's voice cut through Wayne's growing rage. Because if this is what I think it is, we need to discuss Rex's long-term health implications. But more importantly, Hart leaned forward, his voice deadly serious. Wayne, I think you need to know that someone has been putting your family at risk. Wayne stood slowly, his body moving with predatory grace. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building a life together, and Claire had been poisoning their son through her affair. Doctor, I need you to document everything. Every test, every finding, every medical detail. And I need you to keep this between us until I say otherwise. Wayne, what are you planning? Wayne's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. I'm planning to protect my family, Herman. That's what fathers do. As he walked back to the waiting room, Wayne's mind was already working, calculating, planning. Claire was still there, looking worried and innocent, checking her phone. She looked up as he approached, her eyes searching his face. How is he? What did Dr. Hart say? Wayne studied his wife, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided direct eye contact, the expensive new jewelry he hadn't bought her. He said Rex will be fine, Wayne replied smoothly. Just needs rest. Why don't you go home and get some things together? I'll stay with him tonight. Claire nodded quickly, too quickly, already reaching for her purse. I'll bring him some of those smoothies he likes. They always make him feel better. Wayne watched her leave, noting how she immediately pulled out her phone as soon as she thought she was out of sight. After 15 years of marriage, he could read his wife like a blueprint. She was texting someone, and Wayne knew exactly who. As he sat beside Rex's hospital bed, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in months, Wayne began to plan. Claire and Daniel Chapman had made the mistake of involving his child in their betrayal. They'd put Rex at risk, poisoned him with their affair, and lied to his face for months. Wayne Stewart never forgave betrayal, and he never fought fair. Chapter 3, The War Room. 3 days later, Rex was home and recovering. His color returned, and his energy slowly rebuilding. Wayne had taken a week off from work, something he'd never done before, claiming he wanted to spend time with his family after the scare. But Wayne Stewart didn't take vacations. He took reconnaissance missions. From his home office, Wayne had been systematically gathering intelligence like a general preparing for war. His first call had been to Eddie Levy, his oldest friend and the most ruthless private investigator in Texas. Eddie owed Wayne more favors than either man could count, dating back to when Wayne had kept Eddie's construction company from bankruptcy 15 years ago. I need everything on Daniel Chapman, Wayne had told Eddie. Financial records, personal life, business dealings, where he buys his coffee. Everything. How deep you want me to go, Wayne? Ocean floor deep, Eddie. I want to know things about this man that he doesn't know about himself. Eddie's preliminary report arrived within 48 hours, and it painted an interesting picture. Daniel Chapman, 35, came from a wealthy Dallas family, but had been cut off from their money 2 years ago after a gambling addiction surfaced. His architectural firm was barely staying afloat, and he'd been taking on Claire's projects not just for business, but because he needed the money. More importantly, Eddie had discovered that Chapman had been prescribed anxiety medication after losing $200,000 in a poker game to some very dangerous people. The kind of people who didn't accept payment plans. Wayne's second call had been to Thomas Tanner, his lawyer and another man who understood that some problems required creative solutions. Tom, I need you to draft some documents. Quietly. What kind of documents? The kind that will give me complete control of Claire's business assets if certain conditions are met. Medical incapacity, criminal charges, breach of fiduciary duty. Get creative. Wayne, what's this about? Insurance, Tom. Just insurance. His third call had been to Nathan Price, who ran security for Wayne's construction sites. Nathan was an ex-military man who'd learned creative problem-solving in places where the Geneva Convention was more suggestion than law. Nathan, I need surveillance on my wife. Full coverage, but invisible. And I need you to find out everything about her daily routines. How long? Until I say stop. By Thursday evening, Wayne had built a complete picture of his wife's betrayal. Claire and Chapman had been meeting 3 times a week at a luxury apartment Chapman rented downtown. Paid for, Wayne discovered, with money Claire had been funneling from her business accounts. They'd been planning to leave their respective spouses once Chapman's debt problems were resolved. But the most damning evidence came from Nathan's surveillance. Photos of Claire bringing Rex smoothies made in Chapman's kitchen, using Chapman's blender, after spending hours in Chapman's bed. She'd been systematically exposing their son to Chapman's medication residue, without a second thought. Wayne sat in his office that evening, surrounded by surveillance photos, financial records, and legal documents, planning his revenge like a master chess player. Claire thought she was being clever, thought she was playing him for a fool. Chapman thought he was stealing another man's wife and getting away with it. They had no idea they were dealing with Wayne Stewart. His phone buzzed, a text from Claire, working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Wayne smiled and typed back. Take your time, sweetheart. Rex and I are bonding. Rex was already asleep upstairs, finally getting the natural rest he'd been denied for months. Wayne poured himself a whiskey and began making his final preparations. Tomorrow, he would begin to dismantle their lives piece by piece. But tonight, he would savor the moment before the storm, when his enemies still thought they were safe, still thought they were smart enough to betray Wayne Stewart and walk away unscathed. Claire's key turned in the lock at 2 a.m. Wayne heard her careful footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the shower running, the whispered phone call she thought he couldn't hear. It was perfect, she was saying. He doesn't suspect anything. Yes, Daniel, soon. Very soon. Wayne closed his eyes and felt the familiar cold rage settle into his bones like an old friend. Claire and Chapman had made their choice. They'd chosen to betray him, to poison his son, to mock everything he'd built. Now they would learn what happened to people who crossed Wayne Stewart. The war was about to begin. Chapter 4. Gathering the Arsenal. Wayne spent the next week playing the role of devoted husband and father while quietly assembling the tools for Claire's destruction. His performance was flawless, concerned about Rex's health, supportive of Claire's work commitments, the picture of a man grateful to have his family intact. But every smile was calculated, every kiss a countdown to Judgment Day. Eddie Levy's full report on Daniel Chapman arrived on Monday, and it was a masterpiece of investigative work. Chapman wasn't just in debt to dangerous people. He was drowning. His gambling addiction had led him to borrow from a loan shark named Sergio Underwood, who operated out of Houston and had a reputation for collecting debts in ways that left permanent reminders. Chapman owed Underwood $300,000, with interest accumulating at mob rates. The architectural contracts with Claire were barely keeping him afloat, but they weren't enough to clear his debt. Wayne realized that Chapman wasn't just sleeping with his wife for love. He was planning to use Claire's money to save his own life. Even better, Eddie had discovered that Chapman's ex-wife, Cassandra Chapman, lived in Dallas with their twin daughters. She'd divorced Chapman when his gambling came to light, taking half his assets and full custody of the children. She was bitter, broke, and, according to Eddie's intelligence, still legally entitled to Chapman's life insurance policy. Wayne's mind began connecting dots like a master strategist seeing the entire battlefield. His meeting with Nathan Price that Tuesday revealed even more opportunities. Nathan had not only been tracking Claire's movements, but had also identified her support network. Claire's best friend, Marie Gorman, was also having an affair with her personal trainer and was terrified her husband would find out. Marie had been covering for Claire's absences, providing alibis and emotional support for the affair. Marie's vulnerable, Nathan reported. She's scared, guilty, and completely dependent on Claire's discretion. She'd flip in a heartbeat if the pressure was applied correctly. Wayne's lawyer, Thomas Tanner, had been equally productive. By Wednesday, he'd established a series of legal traps that would activate the moment Wayne chose to spring them. Power of attorney documents, emergency medical proxies, business partnership dissolution papers, all legally binding if certain conditions were met. The beautiful thing about these documents, Tanner explained, is that they're all standard legal instruments. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would alert Claire to what's coming. But once activated, they give you complete control over her business empire. But Wayne's most devastating weapon came from an unexpected source. Dr. Herman Hart called on Thursday with information that changed everything. Wayne, I've been thinking about Rex's case, and I need to tell you something. If what we suspect is true, if Claire has been unknowingly exposing Rex to prescription medications through her contact with Chapman, there could be legal implications. What kind of legal implications? Child endangerment. Reckless endangerment of a minor. In Texas, knowingly exposing a child to harmful substances, even indirectly, is a felony. And if we can prove she knew about the risk and continued the behavior. Hart's voice was grim. Wayne, we're talking about serious jail time. Wayne felt a surge of dark satisfaction. How would we prove she knew? Text messages, emails, any communication where she acknowledges Chapman's medication or its effects. Or if she ever mentioned Rex feeling tired, sluggish, or unwell after spending time with her. Wayne thought about the hundreds of texts between Claire and Chapman that Nathan had intercepted. There were several where Claire mentioned Rex seeming mellow or sleepy after their mother-son time, even joking about how the smoothies were knocking him out. Herman, I'm going to need you to document everything. Every test result, every medical opinion, every piece of evidence that shows Rex was being systematically exposed to these substances. Wayne, are you sure about this? Once we go down this road, my son could have died because of her selfishness. Wayne's voice was steel. She chose her affair over his safety. I'm not sure about this, Herman. I'm certain. By Friday evening, Wayne had assembled an arsenal that would have made a military strategist proud. Financial weapons, legal traps, criminal evidence, and human assets all positioned and ready. But he needed one more element to make his revenge complete: timing. Claire thought she was safe because she thought she was smarter than her husband. Chapman thought he was protected because he thought Wayne was just another clueless husband. They were planning their future together, planning to divorce their spouses and start fresh with money they'd stolen and lives they'd destroyed. Wayne would let them get close to their goal. He would let them think they'd won. And then, when they were completely exposed and vulnerable, he would destroy them both so completely that they'd wish they'd never been born. But first, he needed to make one more call. Sergio Underwood? This is Wayne Stewart. I believe you, and I have a mutual friend named Daniel Chapman. I think it's time we had a conversation about his debt situation. Chapter 5, The Puppet Master's Web. The meeting with Sergio Underwood took place at a dive bar in East Houston, the kind of place where conversations happened in cash and nobody remembered faces. Underwood was exactly what Wayne expected, a short, thick man with dead eyes and hands that had clearly done violence. He was also, surprisingly, a pragmatist. Chapman owes me $300 large, Underwood said without preamble. Plus interest. Guy's been dodging my calls for weeks. What if I told you there was a way to collect your money and eliminate Chapman's debt permanently? Wayne leaned back in his chair, studying the loan shark's reaction. I'm listening. Wayne slid a manila envelope across the table. Chapman's been sleeping with my wife. They're planning to run away together using her money. But what if Chapman's sudden disappearance looked like something else entirely? Underwood opened the envelope and whistled low. Eddie Levy's surveillance photos showed Chapman and Claire together, along with detailed financial records showing the money flow from Claire's accounts to Chapman's debts. Your wife's been paying his gambling debts. Indirectly. She doesn't know about the debt, but she's been funding his lifestyle. The money she thinks is going to their new life together? It's been feeding your collection agency. Underwood's smile was ugly but appreciative. You want me to collect from the wife instead? I want you to be patient. In 2 weeks, Chapman is going to get a very large insurance payout. A life-changing amount of money. Enough to clear his debts and set up a new life. What insurance payout? Wayne's smile was cold as winter. His ex-wife's life insurance policy. Cassandra Chapman is about to have a very unfortunate accident. Underwood's eyes sharpened. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about justice. Chapman destroyed my family, endangered my son, and stole from my wife. Cassandra Chapman is a bitter woman who would do anything to hurt her ex-husband. What if she found out about his affair and decided to take revenge? What if she confronted my wife and things got violent? Wayne pulled out another set of documents. Cassandra has been sending threatening messages to Chapman for months. She's unstable, broke, and desperate. And according to Texas law, if she dies under suspicious circumstances related to Chapman, he becomes the primary suspect. But he'll have an alibi? He'll be with my wife when it happens. They'll both have perfect alibis. But the investigation will reveal Chapman's gambling debts, his affair, and Cassandra's threats. The insurance company will delay the payout pending investigation. Chapman will be broke, scared, and desperate. Wayne leaned forward. That's when you collect. Not from Chapman, from my wife. You tell her that Chapman owes you money, that you know about their affair, and that unless she pays his debt immediately, you'll expose everything to the police and her husband. Underwood was grinning now. And she pays to protect their secret. She pays everything. The debt, the interest, and a substantial bonus for your discretion. By the time I'm finished with her, she'll be financially ruined and legally vulnerable. Chapman will be under investigation for murder, and you'll have your money plus interest. What about you? What do you get out of this? Wayne's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. I get to watch them destroy each other. Chapman will blame Claire for not having enough money to pay you immediately. Claire will blame Chapman for bringing this into their relationship. They'll turn on each other, and by the time they realize they've been played, they'll both be destroyed. Underwood studied the documents again. This is elaborate, even for a revenge play. Why not just divorce her and move on? Because they didn't just betray me. Wayne's voice dropped to a whisper. They endangered my son. They poisoned him with their affair. That's not something you divorce. That's something you destroy completely. What about the ex-wife? Cassandra. Wayne's expression didn't change. What about her? She'll be found dead in her apartment, apparently killed during a break-in gone wrong. Very tragic. The kind of random violence that happens in big cities. And you think Chapman will be blamed? I know he will be, because I'm going to make sure the evidence points directly at him. Underwood was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, Mr. Stewart. I'll play along. But if this goes sideways, it won't. I've been planning this for 2 weeks. Every detail is mapped out, every contingency covered. In 1 month, Chapman will be in jail, Claire will be financially ruined and facing criminal charges, and you'll have your money. And your son? My son will learn that there are consequences for betrayal. That justice isn't something you get from courts and lawyers. It's something you take. Wayne stood and dropped a roll of cash on the table. Keep that as a down payment. When this is over, you'll get the rest plus Chapman's debt. All I ask is that you make Claire pay slowly. I want her to feel every dollar leaving her account. As Wayne walked back to his truck, he felt the familiar cold satisfaction settling in his chest. The pieces were in motion now, the trap was set, and his enemies had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, he would begin the final phase. Tomorrow, Cassandra Chapman would die, and the dominoes would start to fall. Wayne Stewart always kept his promises. And he'd promised himself that Claire and Chapman would pay for what they'd done to Rex. It was time to collect. Chapter 6. The Perfect Storm. Wayne's preparation for Cassandra Chapman's murder was meticulous, clinical, and completely untraceable. He'd learned long ago that the difference between a crime and justice was simply in the planning. Through Eddie Levy's network, Wayne had identified Cassandra's routines with military precision. Every Tuesday, she visited her therapist at 6 p.m., then stopped at a small grocery store near her Dallas apartment. She always parked in the same corner of the lot, always entered through the same door, and always spent exactly 37 minutes shopping for the week. The neighborhood was perfect for Wayne's purposes, busy enough that strangers weren't noticed, but not so crowded that witnesses were unavoidable. The store's security cameras had blind spots that Eddie had identified and mapped. Most importantly, Cassandra always shopped alone. Wayne made 3 trips to Dallas over 2 weeks, never staying long enough to be memorable, always paying cash, always wearing different clothes and a baseball cap. He studied the area like an architect studying blueprints, memorizing every entrance, every escape route, every variable that could affect his plan. The weapon came from Nathan Price's collection, an untraceable .22 that had never been registered and couldn't be connected to Wayne through any paper trail. Small caliber, quiet, and deadly at close range. Wayne would dispose of it in a construction site foundation the next day, where it would be buried under tons of concrete forever. But the real genius of Wayne's plan wasn't the murder itself. It was the web of evidence that would point directly at Daniel Chapman, while simultaneously protecting Wayne's alibi. On the day Cassandra died, Wayne was hosting a dinner party at his ranch. 20 guests, including Mayor Ronald Jackson, Police Commissioner Kirk Horton, and Federal Judge Roland Newton. Men whose word was beyond question, whose testimony would be ironclad. The party started at 7 p.m., an hour after Cassandra would be dead. Claire and Chapman, meanwhile, would be together at Chapman's downtown apartment, completely absorbed in planning their future escape. Wayne had used Nathan's surveillance to learn their schedule perfectly. Every Tuesday evening, they met to coordinate their plans and enjoy their stolen time together. At 6:15 p.m., while Wayne's guests were arriving at his ranch and Chapman was undressing his wife, Cassandra Chapman was loading groceries into her car when a man in a hoodie approached her. The attack lasted 30 seconds. 3 shots to the chest, her purse taken to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. No witnesses, no cameras, no evidence except what Wayne wanted to be found. The killer drove away in a stolen Honda that would be found burned out in an abandoned lot 6 hours later. The car had been stolen from a long-term parking lot at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, where Wayne had left his own truck before flying to Denver for a business meeting that existed only in fabricated documents. He'd flown back under a false identity that Eddie had arranged, picked up the Honda, committed the murder, and driven back to Austin in time for his dinner party. By 7:30 p.m., Wayne was toasting his guests with expensive whiskey, discussing municipal contracts and charity fundraisers, while Daniel Chapman's ex-wife lay dying in a Dallas parking lot. The call came at 9:45 p.m., just as Wayne was serving dessert. Eddie Levy, playing his role perfectly, called with the breaking news about Cassandra's murder. "Wayne, I just heard from my contacts in Dallas PD. That Chapman woman, Chapman's ex-wife, she's been shot. Looks like a robbery." Wayne excused himself from the dinner table, stepping into his study with several witnesses who could later testify to his shock and concern. "Jesus, Eddie. Chapman's been dealing with some rough people lately. You think this is connected to his gambling debts?" "Could be. But here's the thing. Chapman was supposed to visit his kids tonight. He was supposed to pick them up from Cassandra at 8 p.m. But the kids are saying he never showed, and his phone's been going straight to voicemail." Wayne felt a cold surge of satisfaction. The children's testimony would establish that Chapman had failed to appear for a scheduled visit, creating a window of opportunity that the police would find very interesting, especially when they discovered Chapman's gambling debts, his bitter divorce, and his financial desperation. "Where is Chapman now?" Wayne asked, making sure his voice carried to the guests who were listening. "Nobody knows. His neighbors say they haven't seen him all day. His office is closed. It's like he just vanished." Of course Chapman had vanished. At that moment, he was in bed with Claire, completely unaware that his world was crashing down around him. By morning, when the police came knocking, Chapman would have to explain where he'd been when his ex-wife was murdered. He would have to admit to the affair, exposing himself and Claire to scandal and suspicion. Wayne returned to his dinner party and finished the evening as a gracious host, accepting condolences for Chapman's loss and discussing the tragic rise in urban crime. Every guest would remember his presence, his shock at the news, his concern for Chapman's well-being. Meanwhile, in Dallas, police were already connecting dots that Wayne had carefully placed for them. Cassandra's threatening text messages to Chapman, Chapman's gambling debts and financial desperation, his failure to appear for the custody visit, and most damning of all, the life insurance policy that would pay Chapman $500,000 if Cassandra died. By midnight, Daniel Chapman had gone from grieving ex-husband to prime suspect in a murder investigation, and he didn't even know it yet. Wayne's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Just heard about Daniel's ex-wife. So awful. Coming home now." Wayne smiled and typed back, "Drive safely, sweetheart. We'll get through this together." But they wouldn't get through it together. In fact, they were about to learn that crossing Wayne Stewart was the last mistake they'd ever make. The storm was gathering, and his enemies were standing right in its path. Chapter 7. The Net Closes. The police came for Daniel Chapman at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, 3 hours after Claire had finally come home and fallen into bed beside Wayne. The pounding on Chapman's apartment door woke half the building, but Claire was sleeping too deeply. exhausted from hours of comforting her lover after the shocking news of his ex-wife's death, to hear her phone ringing. Wayne was in his home office, ostensibly preparing for a morning conference call, when Nathan Price sent him the surveillance photos for Dallas detectives, 2 Austin police officers, and a warrant for Chapman's arrest. Chapman answered the door in his underwear, completely unprepared for what was about to hit him. "Daniel Chapman, you're under arrest for the murder of Cassandra Chapman. You have the right to remain silent." Wayne watched through Nathan's telephoto lens as Chapman's world collapsed in real time. The confusion, the panic, the desperate protests of innocence, all captured in high-definition digital clarity. Chapman kept pointing toward his bedroom, trying to explain that he'd been with someone, that he had an alibi, but the police weren't interested in his explanations until they got him to the station. That's when the real genius of Wayne's plan revealed itself. Chapman's alibi was Claire Stewart, the wife of one of Austin's most prominent businessmen. Claiming he'd been having an affair was one thing, proving it was another. And Claire, faced with the choice between saving Chapman and protecting her own reputation, made exactly the decision Wayne had predicted. "I don't know what you're talking about," Claire told Detective Young Stevenson when he called her at 8 a.m. "Daniel Chapman is my business partner, nothing more. I was home with my family last night." Wayne, listening from the kitchen extension, felt a surge of cold satisfaction. Claire was throwing Chapman under the bus to save herself, just as Wayne had known she would. All those months of love letters and stolen moments meant nothing when her social standing was threatened. But Wayne wasn't done yet. Eddie Levy made his move at 10 a.m., appearing at the police station with a manila envelope full of evidence that painted Chapman as a desperate man with motive, means, and opportunity. "I've been investigating Chapman's gambling debts for a client," Eddie told the detectives. "The man owes serious money to serious people. His ex-wife's life insurance policy was his only way out." Eddie's evidence was devastating because it was completely true. Chapman's $300,000 debt to Sergio Underwood, his ex-wife's threatening text messages, his failure to appear for the custody visit, the insurance policy that would clear his debts and fund his planned escape. What the police didn't know was that Wayne had orchestrated every piece of evidence, manipulated every circumstance, and eliminated every alternative explanation. At noon, Chapman's public defender called Claire again, this time begging her to provide an alibi for her client. "Ms. Stewart, Mr. Chapman insists he was with you from 5 p.m. until midnight yesterday. If that's true, he couldn't have killed his ex-wife." Claire's response was ice cold. "I've already told the police the truth. I was home with my family. I don't know why Mr. Chapman would say otherwise, but perhaps he's confused due to the stress of this tragedy." Wayne had to admire his wife's ruthlessness, even as he prepared to destroy her. Claire was cutting Chapman loose to save herself, abandoning her lover the moment he became inconvenient. It was exactly the kind of calculated betrayal that Wayne had built his life understanding and exploiting. But Claire's denials were about to become irrelevant, because Wayne had one more surprise waiting. At 2 p.m., Sergio Underwood walked into Chapman's architectural firm with 2 large men and a briefcase full of documentation. Chapman's secretary, Jen Lacey, tried to explain that her boss had been arrested, but Underwood wasn't interested in excuses. "Chapman owes me money," Underwood announced loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. "Since he can't pay, I'm collecting from his business partner." Underwood's visit to Claire's design studio an hour later was even more public. He walked in during Claire's afternoon client consultation, a high-profile interior design project for the mayor's wife, and made his demands crystal clear. "Your boyfriend owes me $300,000, Underwood told Claire in front of her horrified client. "He told me you'd be good for it. Said you two were planning a life together with your husband's money." Claire's carefully constructed world began crumbling in that moment. Her client, Marie Gorman's friend Diane Maynard, immediately began spreading gossip about Claire's affair and financial troubles. Within hours, the story was circulating through Austin's social elite like wildfire. But Wayne's masterstroke came at 4 p.m. when Dr. Herman Hart called a meeting with Child Protective Services. "I have evidence that Rex Stewart has been systematically exposed to prescription medications through his mother's negligence," Hart explained to caseworker Olivia Liu. "The child was unknowingly poisoned for months while his mother pursued an extramarital affair." Hart's medical documentation was irrefutable. Rex's blood work, the medication traces, the timeline of his symptoms. All of it painted a picture of criminal negligence that CPS couldn't ignore. At 6 p.m., as Claire sat in her design studio frantically, trying to explain Underwood's accusations to her remaining clients, Child Protective Services knocked on Wayne's door with an emergency custody order. "Mr. Stewart, we need to discuss your son's safety," caseworker Lou explained. "We have evidence that suggests Rex may have been exposed to harmful substances in your home." Wayne played his part perfectly, the shocked husband and concerned father discovering his wife's betrayal for the first time. "Are you saying, Claire, that she would endanger Rex?" "We're saying we need to investigate. And until we complete our investigation, Rex needs to be in a safe environment." "Of course," Wayne agreed immediately. "Rex can stay with me at my brother's ranch outside the city. Whatever you need to protect my son." By 8 p.m., Claire arrived home to find CPS investigators in her house, her husband packing Rex's belongings, and a stack of legal documents on the kitchen table. "Wayne, what's happening? Why are these people here?" Wayne looked at his wife with cold, empty eyes. "They're here because you poisoned our son, Claire. They're here because your affair with Chapman put Rex in danger. They're here because I finally know what kind of woman I married." Claire's face went white. "Wayne, I can explain." "No explanations. No excuses. No forgiveness." Wayne's voice was quiet, deadly. "You chose Chapman over our family. You chose your affair over our son's safety. Now you get to live with the consequences." As CPS led Rex away and the investigators continued their work, Claire finally understood that her carefully hidden affair had been exposed. But she still had no idea how completely Wayne had orchestrated her destruction. That would come tomorrow, when the final phase of Wayne's revenge began. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Thursday morning brought the newspaper headlines that sealed Claire and Chapman's fate. Local architect charged with ex-wife's murder and child endangerment investigation rocks Austin elite. Wayne read them over coffee while Rex slept peacefully at his uncle's ranch, finally free from the poison that had been slowly killing him. Claire had spent the night at a hotel after CPS had declared their house unsafe for Rex's return. She'd called Wayne 17 times, sent 43 text messages, and even tried to enlist Marie Gorman to plead her case. Wayne ignored them all. The time for talking was over. The time for consequences had begun. At 9 a.m., Claire discovered that her business accounts had been frozen. Thomas Tanner's legal traps had been sprung the moment CPS filed their report, triggering the emergency powers Wayne had carefully put in place. As Rex's endangered child and Claire's husband, Wayne now had legal authority over her business assets pending the investigation. "Mr. Tanner." Claire's voice was frantic when she called Wayne's lawyer. "There's been some mistake. I can't access my accounts." "No mistake, Mrs. Stewart. Texas family law allows for asset protection when a child's welfare is at stake. Until the CPS investigation is complete and any criminal charges are resolved, your husband has conservatorship over the family business assets." "Criminal charges? What criminal charges?" Tanner's voice was coldly professional. "Child endangerment, reckless endangerment of a minor, and conspiracy to commit fraud, for starters. The district attorney is quite interested in your case." At 10 a.m., Daniel Chapman learned that his public defender was quitting. The lawyer had discovered Chapman's gambling debts, his connection to Sergio Underwood, and the obvious lies about his alibi. No attorney wanted to defend a client who'd clearly murdered his ex-wife for insurance money while having an affair with a prominent businessman's wife. Chapman's desperate phone calls to Claire went unanswered. Claire was dealing with her own crisis. Sergio Underwood had returned to her design studio with an eviction notice and a demand for immediate payment of Chapman's debt. "I don't care if your accounts are frozen," Underwood told her in front of her horrified employees. "Chapman owes me money, and he told me you'd pay it. Figure it out, or I start collecting in other ways." At noon, the final domino fell when Rex gave his videotaped statement to CPS investigators. Wayne had carefully coached his son, not to lie, but to tell the complete truth about how sick he'd been feeling, how the smoothies his mother gave him made him sleepy, how his mother had been distracted and absent for months. "Mom seemed different," Rex told the camera, his young voice breaking Wayne's heart and hardening his resolve simultaneously. "She was always on her phone, always rushing somewhere. And I kept getting more and more tired. But she said the smoothies would help me feel better." Rex's statement, combined with Dr. Hart's medical evidence, was enough for District Attorney Muhammad Houston to file formal charges against Claire. Child endangerment in the first degree, reckless endangerment of a minor, and criminal negligence, each carrying potential jail time and guaranteed to destroy what remained of her reputation. By 2 p.m., Claire was sitting in a police station being read her rights while her mugshot was taken for the evening news. Her booking photo would run alongside Chapman's on every local station, cementing their connection in the public mind and destroying any chance of claiming innocence. At 4 p.m., Wayne received the call he'd been waiting for. Eddie Levy had been monitoring police communications and had the update Wayne needed. "Chapman's breaking," Eddie reported. "He's been in interrogation for 6 hours, and his story keeps changing. First he said he was alone, then he claimed he was with a business associate. Now he's demanding to speak to Claire. But she's been arrested and can't take visitors." And Underwood, playing his part perfectly, he's telling everyone who'll listen that Chapman and Claire were planning to run away together using stolen money. The gambling debt story is spreading through the underworld like wildfire. Chapman's got enemies on both sides of the law now. Wayne felt the cold satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Chapman was isolated, desperate, and facing life in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Claire was financially ruined, criminally charged, and socially destroyed. Both of them were learning what happened when you betrayed Wayne Stewart and endangered his son. But Wayne wasn't finished yet. He had one more lesson to teach. At 6 p.m., Wayne visited Claire in jail. She looked small and broken in her orange jumpsuit, her perfect makeup gone, her designer clothes replaced with county-issued uniforms. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears and desperate hope. "Wayne, thank God you're here. This is all a mistake. I can explain everything." "No." Wayne's voice cut through her pleas like a blade. "You can't explain poisoning our son. You can't explain putting your affair ahead of Rex's health. You can't explain lying to my face for months while you destroyed our family. I never meant for Rex to get hurt. But he did get hurt. He could have died, Claire. All because you were too selfish to think about anyone but yourself and Chapman." Claire reached across the table, trying to touch his hand, but Wayne pulled away. "Wayne, please. I love you. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. You love me." Wayne's laugh was hollow and terrifying. "You've been sleeping with Chapman for 8 months. You've been stealing money from our accounts to pay his debts. You've been poisoning our son with secondhand medication. That's not love, Claire. That's betrayal. How did you?" Claire's face went white as she realized Wayne knew everything. "How did I find out? I've known for weeks, Claire. I've been watching you, documenting your affair, gathering evidence of what you've done to our family. Did you really think you could lie to me forever?" Claire's expression shifted from desperation to confusion. "If you've known for weeks, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop me?" Wayne's smile was cold as death. "Because I wanted you to hang yourself. I wanted you and Chapman to dig your grave so deep that there'd be no climbing out. And you did exactly what I knew you'd do. You chose him over our family, and now you're both destroyed. Wayne, please. Chapman's going to prison for murder. You're going to prison for child endangerment. Your business is gone, your reputation is destroyed, and your lover is denying he ever knew you to save his own skin." Wayne stood, straightening his jacket. "You made your choice, Claire. Now live with it." As Wayne walked away, Claire's sobs echoed through the visiting room. But he didn't look back. He'd spent 15 years loving a woman who'd never existed, married to someone who'd ultimately proven herself capable of poisoning their child for the sake of an affair. Wayne Stewart never forgave betrayal, and he never forgot the people who chose to cross him. The war was almost over. Victory was within reach. Chapter 9: Victory and Vengeance. 6 months later, Wayne stood in the courthouse hallway watching Daniel Chapman led away in shackles. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Cassandra Chapman. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice served with surgical precision. Chapman had never stopped protesting his innocence, never stopped claiming that Claire Stewart could provide his alibi, never stopped insisting that he'd been framed. But Claire's testimony at his trial had been devastating in its coldness. "I barely knew Mr. Chapman," Claire had said under oath, her voice steady despite the orange jumpsuit and shackles. "He was my business partner, nothing more. His claims about our relationship are fantasies created by a desperate man trying to escape justice for murdering his ex-wife." Wayne had to admire Claire's survival instinct. Even facing her own criminal charges, she'd been willing to throw Chapman completely under the bus to minimize her own culpability. It was exactly the kind of calculated betrayal that Wayne had predicted and planned for. Claire's own trial had concluded 3 weeks earlier with a plea bargain that Wayne's lawyer had carefully negotiated. 3 years in state prison for child endangerment, with the possibility of parole in 18 months. Her business was gone, her social standing destroyed, her financial assets seized to pay restitution and legal fees. But Wayne's greatest victory wasn't the prison sentences or the financial ruin. It was watching his enemies destroy each other exactly as he'd planned. In the months before trial, Chapman and Claire had turned on each other with vicious intensity. Chapman, desperate to save himself, had tried to expose every detail of their affair, hoping to prove his alibi. Claire, equally desperate, had portrayed Chapman as a manipulative predator who'd seduced her while secretly planning to steal her money. Their mutual destruction had been beautiful to watch. Text messages between them revealed not love, but financial calculation. Chapman using Claire for money, Claire using Chapman for status and excitement. When faced with real consequences, their great love had evaporated like morning mist. Sergio Underwood had played his role perfectly, collecting his money from Claire's seized assets while maintaining the fiction that Chapman owed him gambling debts. The loan shark had even testified at Chapman's trial, describing Chapman as a desperate man who'd often talked about getting rid of his ex-wife. Wayne's son Rex, now 16 and thriving, knew nothing about his father's carefully orchestrated revenge. As far as Rex understood, his parents had divorced after his mother's affair was discovered. His mother had been arrested for endangering his health, and his mother's lover had been revealed as a murderer. Justice had been served, and the family was healing. Rex lived with Wayne now at the ranch, attending a private school where his classmates had quickly forgotten the scandal. The boy was healthy, happy, and completely devoted to his father, the man who'd saved him from his mother's poison and protected him from the consequences of adult betrayal. "Dad," Rex had said just last week, "I'm glad it's just us now. Mom was always so distracted, always somewhere else. But you're always here." Wayne had felt a surge of paternal love, so pure it almost hurt. This was what he'd fought for: his son's safety, his son's future, his son's understanding that actions had consequences and that family loyalty was sacred. Dr. Herman Hart had been instrumental in Rex's recovery, both physically and emotionally. The medication traces had finally cleared from Rex's system, and his energy and focus had returned completely. Hart had also provided counseling to help Rex process his mother's betrayal without developing lasting psychological damage. "Rex is resilient," Hart had told Wayne privately. "Children often recover from parental betrayal better than adults do. He understands that his mother made bad choices, but he doesn't blame himself. That's largely because of how you've handled this situation." Wayne had handled it by never lying to Rex, never making excuses for Claire's behavior, but also never poisoning the boy against his mother unnecessarily. Rex would make his own decisions about Claire when he was older. Wayne's job was to protect him and teach him that strength meant never accepting betrayal. Eddie Levy had dissolved his surveillance operation and returned to normal investigations, but he'd kept all the evidence from Wayne's case. Insurance, Eddie had called it, though they both knew it was really a monument to perfect planning and flawless execution. Nathan Price had returned to construction site security, but he'd also begun training Wayne's other employees in personal protection and counter-surveillance. Wayne Stewart's empire would never again be vulnerable to the kind of infiltration that Claire and Chapman had attempted. Thomas Tanner had used Wayne's case as a blueprint for protecting other wealthy clients from similar betrayals. The Stewart Protocols, as Tanner privately called them, were now standard practice for any of his clients going through difficult divorces or custody battles. But Wayne's greatest satisfaction came from a phone call he'd received the previous week. Claire, calling from prison, had been granted one phone call to her ex-husband as part of a supervised family counseling program. "Wayne." Her voice had been small, broken, aged years in just months. "I know you'll probably hang up, but I need you to know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Rex, about the affair, about everything." Wayne had listened in silence, feeling nothing. "I know you hate me," Claire continued, "and I understand why. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with Daniel, I knew it was wrong. I knew I was destroying everything good in my life. Why? Wayne had finally asked. Why throw away 15 years for a gambling addict who was using you for money? Claire's sob had been audible through the phone. Because I felt invisible. Because you were always working, always building, always focused on everything except me. Daniel made me feel special, made me feel wanted. So you poisoned our son to feel special? I didn't know about the medication. I swear on Rex's life. I didn't know I was hurting him. Wayne's voice had been cold as winter. You knew he was getting sick. You knew he was tired and sluggish. You chose to ignore it because acknowledging it would have interfered with your affair. Wayne, please. Goodbye, Claire. Don't call again. That had been their last conversation, and it would remain their last. Wayne Stewart had given Claire 15 years of his life, built an empire for their family, protected and provided for her. In return, she'd betrayed him, endangered their son, and chosen another man. Some things were unforgivable. Some betrayals were permanent. As Wayne drove home from Chapman's sentencing, he felt the deep satisfaction of a man who'd played a perfect game. His enemies were destroyed, his son was safe, and his empire was stronger than ever. He'd learned that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. But he'd also learned that careful planning and ruthless execution could overcome any betrayal. Rex was waiting at the ranch when Wayne arrived. Homework spread across the kitchen table, a picture of normalcy and health that filled Wayne's heart with quiet pride. How was court, Dad? Justice was served, son. Chapman got what he deserved. Rex nodded seriously, understanding more than most 16-year-olds about the consequences of adult choices. Good. People should pay for the bad things they do. Wayne smiled and ruffled his son's hair. Yes, they should. That's what separates the strong from the weak. The willingness to make sure there are consequences for betrayal. As they sat down to dinner together, Wayne felt the deep contentment of a man who'd protected what mattered most. Claire and Chapman had learned what happened when you crossed Wayne Stewart. They'd learned that betrayal had a price, and that price was everything. Wayne Stewart never forgave. Wayne Stewart never forgot. And Wayne Stewart always won. The war was over. Victory was complete. And the lesson was clear for anyone smart enough to understand it. Never betray the family. Never endanger the children. And never, ever underestimate the capacity for revenge of a man who's learned that trust is weakness and mercy is death. Wayne raised his glass of water in a silent toast to his son, his empire, and his perfect revenge. Some stories ended with forgiveness and reconciliation. This wasn't one of them. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.